This is part 2 of my series on Stoicism. Part 1 can be found on my channel in my self-development playlist. Stoicism cuts deep, so I'd never expect these videos to be lighthearted. Stoicism is meant to be able to help you with life's hardest possible misfortunes while also giving you the tools to cultivate an excellent life filled with virtue, wisdom, and joy. To the Stoics, life is considered basically unbearable if we let our emotions have their way with us all the time. I've seen this manifest with someone I know at work. They're always getting mad and breaking things at work over minor problems, and it's ruining their chances for their life to go well, and basically just guaranteeing they get stuck in a low state. This type of person would benefit immensely from just at least trying to control those impulses. The ability to make smart and wise decisions comes from our ruling faculty, as the Stoics would call it. They believe that nature gave you the ability to use good judgment, so it's already within you, so one of their mottos is, if you seek anything good, get it from within yourself. What you want is already able to be gotten from within you, you just have to make it happen. Stoicism gives you an inner citadel to defend against life's many attacks, an inner fortress so that you're guarded from life's unpredictable events. The term they give to harmful emotions and harmful desires is pathy, which means passions. They believed these passions to be the root of all human suffering. They're also not the same passion you and I are familiar with, like being passionate about something good. Stoic passions like destructive anger, depression, anxiety, cowardice, jealousy were all considered to be incompatible with attaining true happiness. The key is to not let these emotions fester when you come across them, which you will once in a while because you're human, and one way to do this is to not let them repeat on loop in your mind when something bad happens. The term for Stoics overcoming negative emotions and desires is apatheia, meaning being apathetic towards harmful passions. Laelius, a Stoic philosopher, said it would be the greatest possible mistake to try to eliminate healthy feelings. If you've eliminated feelings like joy from your life, you've gone too far with being numb or stoic. So one thing that many will find tricky is that Stoics care about their communities, their family, friends, and citizens. These values are supposed to be common sense to a well-functioning society. But America has so many pointless divisions that we're very far from creating some united community focused on a common good. In fact, and I unfortunately partake in this as well sometimes, the average American doesn't seem to generally like people. And if you think about it, that's because so many people irrationally act on their unhealthy feelings, and this very much includes the world leaders who irrationally desire extreme control of others. The first moment of an emotion starting to emerge is what the Stoics call Protopassions, or the first movement of a negative emotion. Even when you get very good at Stoicism, which takes a ton of work for a long time, you'll still probably feel the first second of a negative emotion trying to overtake you, but won't let it. Though as I've experienced, the more calm and rational you become, the more what you get frustrated or sad about starts to change. So it's possible to get many things that aren't huge catastrophic events to not even spark any negative reaction at all from you because they're not even worth your time. The further you advance in Stoicism, the bigger something has to be to get you to react negatively to it. Healthy passions are called eupatheia. Although Stoics didn't directly go after these emotions, they naturally come with living a virtuous life. Love, or natural affection towards others, does play a part in Stoicism, and again that can be hard because so much of humanity is so bad. Stoics believe that most of humanity is misguided, and that you should try to love them anyway, as it's simply lack of good judgment that keeps them from behaving well. There are limits to everything though. I can't say I love someone like George Soros. Medicine for the mind is another way Stoics refer to Stoicism. Stoicism was literally based on self-improvement even in the ancient days, so self-improvement is not some modern new agey concept. Self-improvement is literally just doing anything in your life better than you did it before. Did you get a promotion or raise? That's self-improvement. Did you get some sort of financial thing you've always been wanting and were able to afford it? That's self-improvement. If you do anything positive for yourself, you're into self-improvement whether you realize it or not. The Stoics considered attaining eudaimonia for the rest of your life to be extremely difficult, so if you fall short of that ideal, that's perfectly okay because you're a human. They said that someone who would achieve perfect eudaimonia to be as rare as a phoenix born every 500 years. Eudaimonia is to the Stoics a nearly godlike state. A practice you can do is to think about a big situation you've experienced in your life and what you can control and can't control about it. Let's say a big storm hits and your house floods. What can you control about that situation? What can't you control? You can control how much water you let into your house if the door will hold, but you can't control how strong the storm is or how much damage it'll do to your house even despite your best efforts. If your house gets destroyed by it, you couldn't control that, but you can control how you react to it. When something terrible happens, our continuous reactions towards it, positive or negative, are what truly determines our character. If you didn't let the situation get to you, you won. If you're unaffected or joyfully laughing after something bad happens, you overcame it. Let's try another practice. Let's say a disaster happens at work. I've seen someone at my job break a giant wall they were building, and I didn't even know how to react because I'd never even seen anything like that. It also made me realize no matter what mistake I make with anything, it'll probably never even be close to that bad. But I realized they were actually handling it really well. I didn't realize to them building a wall isn't some big deal, and they didn't hold it against each other and just rebuilt it and got along. Another Stoic practice is to think of, what if things don't turn out the way I want? How will I react to that in a positive way? And if I can't do that, at least not let it affect me. But if you choose to do this, make sure you do it right. The wrong way to do it would be to let anxiety overtake you. The right way is for this to lessen your anxiety because you're thinking about how you'd continue even if things don't turn out ideally, which they rarely do for anyone. The Stoics consider craving to be the start of an unhealthy desire. It starts from bad judgments about what's valuable. So basically, let's say a person, like a CEO, craves more and more wealth and never gives any of it back. It's because their value judgment on money is warped. They believe it to be the most important thing in life, and it causes them to hoard it to an excessive extent that creates a lot of suffering. This is another reason I'm glad I'm a centrist. If I was on the left, I'd have to be like, the CEO of Subway should make exactly as much as someone who makes sandwiches. If I was on the right, I'd have to be like, capitalism never fails, don't pay employees more than the bare minimum. As always, the answer is right in the middle. The CEO shouldn't make the same amount as a regular employee, nowhere close, but the employees also shouldn't be barely scraping by on wages that aren't even livable when the CEO has such a massive excess of money. There should be a great reward for being the CEO, but don't make the rest of the population suffer for that reward. Communism is never the answer and will never be the answer, but capitalism has many flaws as well. A prison and justice system built on profit wants you in that cycle giving money to it, and a healthcare system built on profit wants you in that cycle giving tons of money to it. There has to be a better way, and maybe eventually we'll find it, but it's not on either extreme side. Also, people who really pay attention are starting to notice something. Did you know that woke politics started really going mainstream at basically the exact same time as Occupy Wall Street, and you never really heard about the 99% of the population versus the 1% again, and woke politics started taking everything over. Very interesting timing. It's almost as if they're punishing us for trying to take them on. Something that many probably don't think about is that Stoics also consider mistaken value judgments to also factor in things that are actually good as being bad. So we avoid pain and hardship that can transform us because we believe them to be inherently bad. The majority of people have values that don't make sense and conflict with each other and create a pattern of self-sabotage. They get an opportunity, but let it slip through their fingers because one little thing about it didn't go the way they wanted. Believe me, people can always easily justify some reason to quit something that would make their life better, and they often do. The four categories of Stoic passions were classified by Zeno to be distress, fear, craving, and pleasure. Number 1. Distress, or lupe in Greek, can also be translated as suffering or grief. An irrational contraction of the soul or mind, meaning a shrinking or damaging of your soul or mind over something unreasonable. This happens when you fail to avoid something you perceive as bad that's not inherently bad, or when you don't obtain something good that's not inherently good. Distress, when allowed to manifest into your mind, becomes unhealthy emotions like anguish and sorrow. Number 2. Fear, or phobos. The irrational assumption that something bad will happen. This doesn't mean nothing bad will ever happen, but this one is concerned with when you have anxiety or fear of something that it doesn't make sense to be overly fearful about. Fear becomes panic, dread, or nervousness when allowed to go too far. Number 3. Craving, or epithumia. An irrational striving for something that isn't beneficial to you. Most of the time, people crave what's highly detrimental to them. Excessive love of pleasure is one way craving goes too far. Number 4. Pleasure, or hedonic. An irrational excitement over harmful things that seem to be worth choosing. This becomes things like being overly self-indulgent or greedy. If there's one thing in my videos you should think very carefully about before employing, it's when I talked about using anger. I've thought about this a lot and still stand by it, but that's with a lot of conditions on it. I'm going to go ahead and say 90 to 95% can't handle their anger properly. If you're in the 5 or 10% that can properly hone it into fuel and energy and never let it explode negatively, then yes, it's useful. But if you want to go down the path of letting go of anger and are able to use pure drive or something like that as what pushes you, that may be better. Do what works best for you. If anger starts messing things up for you, I would stop. It's definitely a controversial opinion to say anger is useful, but I'm not the only self-development coach or psychologist who said it. It's easy to say to let go of it and never use it. It's much trickier to try to say to use it. It's completely up to you. But in a way, this still goes along with Stoicism, because remember, you're still going to feel the initial impulses of emotions like anger, you just get better at managing them. I personally am very rarely angry at this point in my life, though with regards to how society is going, like putting up statues of demons, it'd be basically impossible for me not to feel some anger. So the Stoics say that an unconscious movement of the mind or soul, or an emotional reflex, is how the passions like distress and fear begin. They say we can't control the initial reaction, but we can control how we react after the first second or two of feeling the emotion. These are called the Protopassions, meaning first passions, so basically if you start to tear up at something tragic happening, you can't really control that. Though in my experience, things I used to get frustrated over I no longer do, so you can change what even creates the initial reaction or protopassion in the first place. So in my opinion, you can create a mindset where nearly nothing upsets or frightens you. Reason matters immensely in Stoicism, so all of this is meant to be done within reason. If your brother just died, it'd almost make no sense to not grieve if you loved him at least a little. So their quote on this is, "Nature requires from us some sorrow, while any more than this is vanity. But never will I demand of you that you should not grieve at all." In the first movement of the mind, the brain starts an automatic reaction triggered by some external thing, say for example hearing loud thunder. The Stoics believe this is the part of the start of the emotional reaction you can't control, although some of them did believe that by constant training you could make yourself react barely at all to things like this. Personally for me, when something like thunder happens, I just look at it. In the second movement of the mind, we give consent to our first reaction and we start to judge it. Say something breaks at work and it's really frustrating. There are two main ways to handle this. The first is the bad way, letting the first reaction, the machine breaking, transform into a value judgment of, "This is terrible, why can't anything go right?" slamming their fist into the machine. I see this all the time. This can lose people their jobs or make them look very silly in front of their coworkers. The right way is to let that initial reaction be one of understanding that the machine broke, judge that the machine breaking needs to be fixed, and then just fix it with no negative emotional reaction. In the third movement of the mind, if handled wrongly, we lose control, reason and wisdom go out the window, and passions of the bad kind start overtaking us. The way to handle this is to just calm yourself and rationally evaluate how to deal with what's going on. For those who try to dismiss philosophy outright, I'd be very careful with that because a lot of modern sciences like therapy originated from philosophies like Stoicism. Stoicism is called medicine for the mind and soul, a therapy of the passions. Modern therapy actually really likes and agrees with Stoicism, though they probably won't ask as much of you as Stoicism would. Stoicism is actually the predecessor to cognitive behavioral therapy. So yeah, philosophy is important and very valid. The people in STEM who build machines or help people live often live according to powerful philosophies. In fact, the Hippocratic Oath originates from ethics, which is a part of philosophy. The Hippocratic Oath says to first, do no harm. It'd be quite ironic for some doctors and scientists to dismiss philosophy when so much of what they do is built on it. If you want to take Stoicism even further, you can write down how you were Stoic throughout the day and how you handled situations and how you could have handled them a bit better or a lot better. Stoics were very fond of writing down how they were doing and keeping track of themselves. So if you're a guy, good news, you now have a manly way to write a journal. And one other thing, I take back what I said about therapy being small-minded in my previous video on Stoicism. I wasn't trying to say that the practice is invalid, I defend therapy in that video, but yeah, just make sure therapy isn't the end-all be-all. So the Stoics want to change out your unhealthy passions with healthy passions. I'll say this in a less complicated way than the philosophers would. They basically believe joy and cheerfulness will naturally come from being virtuous and wise. Here are the three healthy passions of the Stoics. Number 1. Joy. A feeling of elation over acting in a benevolent and virtuous manner. Joy takes the form of things like being in good spirits and having high morale. Number 2. Discretion. A feeling of reluctance towards vice, recognizing its bad and harmful aspects. Discretion takes the form of having dignity, sanctity, and being mindful. Number 3. Willing. The good form of irrational craving, basically desiring the flourishing of yourself and mankind. It's also related to natural affection towards other people. They believed that joy fluctuates wildly in normal people, while it becomes completely secure in the sage as a state of transcendent joy. A very important distinction of Stoicism from other philosophies is that they'll act how they need to act regardless of if joy comes with it or not. A Stoic will face the trials of life with honor, grace, and virtue, believing acting appropriately according to their beliefs on virtue to be its own reward. Remember, virtue is its own reward, everything else comes afterwards. The Stoics were clear that virtuous actions must be taken simply because you know they're the right thing to do, otherwise you're relying too much on emotions to dictate how you act. When positive emotions appear, great, but they aren't a guarantee. This is why discipline is so incredibly important to self-development. It makes us act even during times there isn't even a tangible reward, even during times we don't want to, but we know we have to be the best version of ourselves. The Stoic warrior doesn't wait for the warm radiance of positive emotions to act. When it's time to go to battle, he just suits up and enters the battlefield. Another important distinction is seeking joy at the cost of virtue is not the way to go, and certainly not the hard but rewarding path. After all, if you seek ecstasy above all else, that's how people try to take shortcuts to those feelings and use hard drugs to get there. Remember, hard drugs are what I have an issue with because I've seen them ruin too many lives. If something grows from the ground and is pretty harmless, who gives a damn? Always remember, legality and morality are not necessarily the same. There are some incredibly silly laws that are outdated that have nothing to do with morality. You can't have your alligator chained to a fire hydrant in Alabama, for example. That's an actual law. You're not allowed to wear cowboy boots unless you own at least 2 cows in California. That's another one. Did you know that in what ancient philosophers considered perfect societies, you wouldn't even need laws? You would just act morally without them? That blew my mind when I first heard it. It really shows that people have such an incredibly long way to go. Here's a quote about how the Stoics live in accordance with the nature of the world. Nothing that occurs in the world happens at the wrong time for me. All that your seasons produce is fruit for me. It is from you that all things come, all things are within you, and all things move towards you. So here's something highly crucial. The Stoics accept whatever happens to them, but does that mean they're doormats and just kind of passively resign themselves to bad events? It doesn't. It means they accept whatever hand they're dealt and handle it with equanimity, meaning mental composure, especially in difficult situations, and make the best of every situation. So let's talk about survival here. This is an important distinction I'm going to make. Say you get injured by a bear but manage to get away. If you really wanted to, you could bleed out in the forest and actually could make an argument for that being stoic. You're accepting your fate and handling it well. But really, while that is Stoic on a technicality, letting yourself die like that is not the wisest thing you can do, and it's also not virtuous because you extinguish your potential, probably devastate your family and friends, and letting yourself die like that gets rid of all the possible good you could have done in the world. So the type of passive acceptance that would be bad is letting yourself bleed out. The good type of acceptance would be acknowledging you're injured, remaining calm, focusing on survival, and making it out of there so you can live your life. They have a quote that goes, "Seek not for events to happen as you wish, but rather wish for events to happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly." Here's two mantras the Stoics have for more understanding of the saying, endure and renounce, from Epictetus. 1. Endure what you fear or find painful with courage and perseverance. 2. Renounce or abstain from what you irrationally crave through self-discipline and discretion. Endure and renounce can also be used in the way I used it before, and this still goes along with Stoic philosophy, to endure a current hardship then leave it in the past after it has passed. So there's an acquaintance of mine that is a good example of how craving can go very, very badly. So basically, she craves food to the extent she's spending $35 at McDonald's for lunch basically every day. That's just one meal. The problem is she's having medical issues from this, so it's an addiction that no matter how much society tries to support it, is still unhealthy and dangerous at the end of the day. You can be beautiful at every size, you can't be healthy at every size. I like thick and thin and everything in between women myself. There's a lot of psychology that goes behind her eating the way she does, and she ultimately wants to be more healthy and fit, as she said herself. So basically what she says every single time she does this is, "I deserve it." That's the magic phrase she's using to always justify her eating in severe excess in a way that she herself deep down doesn't actually want. But what's happening is she wants the short-term enjoyment of eating the food to fill some type of emptiness she has. Me and the person I talk about this with, who's very into psychology, still don't know what the emptiness is. So basically this is an example of how seeking joy above virtue is causing her to lead a life she doesn't want. Another aspect of this is she wants to save money because she has very extreme spending habits. It's pretty much like she feels bad if she has even $1 in her bank account. She believes every dollar should be spent at all times, even going into the negatives on our bank account to do so. This is a very dangerous mindset to be in, and I know this because I was in this mindset for a short period in my life. For a few months many years ago, I would be close to the negatives, I'd overdraft, and would always justify it by saying this next paycheck will give me just above water enough to survive. Yeah, if nothing at all unexpected happens. The unexpected always happens with life, that's part of the territory. So basically, this is more cognitive dissonance of how she wants to be in a better financial state and save money, but her actual habits show she doesn't like saving money at all. Social media most likely got her to the point where she's watching people buy expensive things and believes she needs to do this for her status to appear high. The problem is, she's living way above her means, so her quality of life is suffering in all areas just so she can have some nice clothes. How the Stoics would talk about this is she's excessively craving things that bring pleasure to her senses, which to the Stoics are considered indifferent and considering them necessary to her happiness. If she cared a lot less about the short term, her life would drastically improve almost immediately. Long-term satisfaction will always beat out short-term pleasure. Our society is all about short-term instant gratification these days, and that's one reason that things are so screwed up. So, one big difference from the Stoics and the Cynics, and remember the Cynics we're talking about aren't cynical people, but people that went through extreme hardship and poverty on purpose to take a shortcut to virtue, is that the Stoics don't believe you should renounce all cravings. They do believe you should be emotionally detached from cravings. They don't want you to torture yourself. Remember though, there are different schools of Stoicism, so they disagreed with each other on some things, and this also of course means I can disagree with them on a few things. Some believed you should always just live reasonably, but some like Seneca were firmer and said you should purposely go through some periods where you're only drinking water and eating what's necessary to survive to strengthen yourself and see if you can do it. I'm going to do this for a month sometime in the future. There was a time I used to be kind of scared of philosophy. I thought it would somehow make my life worse. But one thing that's incredibly crucial is, just like with everything in life, you don't have to agree with every single thing you hear. Philosophy has done way more overall good for my life than it's harmed it. If I hear some cynical worldview, well, I can simply disagree with it or disregard it. Philosophy's main goal is to help you live a fulfilling life, and the Stoics are very much part of this as philosophers themselves. Once you act in a rational manner with regards to cravings, distress, fear, and pleasure, then you're ready to move on to ethics and logic according to Epictetus. But I've already been teaching you about some of these things anyway. I'll give you the knowledge, it's ultimately up to you how to live your life. So this certainly shook me when I first heard it, but if you're ready, you can hear what some of the Stoics think about how well you're doing with this philosophy. If you're troubled and life doesn't go smoothly for you because of negative emotions and negative desires, it's a warning sign that you're not following the basic maxim of Stoic ethics, that virtue is the only true good and that what is not in your control ultimately doesn't matter. They believe you're barely a novice to Stoicism if you feel like you're failing to get what you desire and receiving things you're against and are still a slave to your negative passions. How the idyllic sage would act instead is to have true freedom because he only desires positive things that are within his control and only feels neutral or positive emotions, and so he's never hindered and his life goes smoothly. Hadot called this amor fati, meaning loving acceptance of your fate. So to me, we make the fate of the future. We can help determine the future by our actions today. But what already happened in the past to you is fate. So if you can learn to love every aspect of what has happened to you in your life and use it for self-transformation, you can become very powerful mentally. The famous saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," actually originated from Nietzsche, a philosopher. Stoics call you a citizen of the cosmos if you live in harmony with the world and the universe and accept the fate that's already befallen you. But remember, you can always change the future. I'm going to give you a psychological exercise of the Stoics, and I've unintentionally done this a few times before discovering Stoicism, and it definitely helped me out. It's called the view from above, basically thinking about things in the third person instead of the first person. So say you're getting really mad about burning some food. Imagine how silly it would sound in the third person being written in a book. And so, Steve flipped out about burning an onion. It's often a great way to realize whatever you're dealing with really isn't that big of a deal. Very interestingly, when the Stoics talk about fate, they don't mean some mystical thing. They were very logical people. They actually mean the causality which causes every event in the universe to happen. So things get complicated here. The Stoics believe you have free will in the sense that you can do what you want. They don't believe you have metaphysical free will. Metaphysics is one of the 4 branches of philosophy that deals with cause and effect, space and time, and the fundamental nature of reality. Back on metaphysical free will, what that would be is being free from prior events. You can renounce them, but the chain of events is still there in reality that happened in the past. You might as well use it for you and not against you. So while you're starting out with these theories, you may get to where you think a lot about this stuff, but eventually they become ingrained into you, and that's when you can truly focus on the present moment, which is part of many schools of thought, but Stoicism as well. One simple way to do this is to at least lower the amount you regret the past or worry about the future. To go further from there, try to be aware of every second that passes without trying too hard to do so. So the more I think about it, the more I think I actually agree with the Stoics on fate. So they actually seem to agree that you can determine the future. What they believe about fate is that fate goes along with your actions, not that fate is something that will be set in stone regardless of what you do. This is very empowering, and I'm glad they agree with me on this. You determine your own fate. So Stoicism isn't just a mystical philosophy, it also really incorporates hardcore objective logic. So with that in mind, one of the techniques they would use to think about a situation or thing is called physical definition. You get an event down to its objective qualities, so if a car you see has 4 wheels, it objectively has 4 wheels. If it's red in your eyes, that's a little trickier because people see colors differently, so you can't really get objective with colors. Other objective things about this specific car are that it has an engine, oil, and all of that. So you're getting at an objective representation of the object or car with no opinions involved. This is basically the opposite of how mainstream news is these days, which is not at all how it's supposed to be. News reporting is supposed to be objective with no opinions. We're in a period of what you'd call severe yellow journalism. Not to knock any local stations, I'm sure you're trying your best, but the big companies controlled by the big dollars are as far from objective as you can possibly get. So what's the use of this technique, this sort of scientific analysis or logical representation of a thing? Well, it can be used to examine the parts of something you're seeing, for example, say a music video or a news story. It's not something I do too often, sometimes I want to get lost in the magic, but what this technique is meant to do is to reduce something down to its parts so you can see it or hear it without getting enchanted by it. So you could, for example, take apart a song and think about what each instrument is doing to make the song sound how it is, or watch a music video and try to see what effects and lighting and symbolism they're using, which is often a lot. This becomes even more useful with regard to events because you can break down events into their individual aspects and calmly evaluate them. If your car gets a major issue, say the engine nearly dies, you can calmly think that you need to replace the engine of the car, and until you can do so you need to try to get other transportation to where you're going. However long you need to handle this, you've got the tools from Stoicism to be able to handle it gracefully. Seize the day, or carpe diem, is another big part of Stoicism, living your life moment by moment, capturing each moment doing the good you can while not stressing too much over the past or future. We should also handle indifferent things, or things out of our control, with detachment. This is the only route to eudaimonia, everything else is transient. If you look at every hardship of life as a chance to test your character and want to try your best to overcome the challenge successfully, you're actually already a high-level philosopher in this aspect, intentionally or not. What stands in the way becomes the way. So one reason self-criticism is useful and that I made a video on it is that it lessens the blow of criticism. If you beat them to the punch, you're already aware of what they were going to criticize, so it's not a surprise. Now this doesn't mean you should continue bad habits unless they're pretty harmless, but basically you thought of something in advance that could go wrong and handled it. When you contemplate a future event without anxiety, you're preparing yourself for it if it comes to pass. This is how you can get ahead of a lot of people. Many people go to work the second they have to, and traffic has to go basically perfect for them to arrive just in time. There are definitely times in my life I've been like this, but I've noticed I'm much happier when I go to work a little early, even if I don't actually get in the building early. Taking out the stress of hoping things go perfectly on the road is one way to set yourself up for success. It's also planning for possible misfortunes like the Stoics would, like getting a flat tire or there being something that blocks your normal way like construction or anything. So since you're already prepared for the fact that you might get a flat, when it happens you're ready to handle it without frustration getting in the way. One thinking exercise you can do for yourself is, it's always possible that X can happen to me, how do I handle it in the best possible way? The official way to handle this from Epictetus is, say a relative dies. Number 1, remind yourself that you knew it was always possible that this could happen. Number 2, remind yourself that this is external and does not truly harm you, though remember, it's only human to grieve for some time. Number 3, remember that the chain of events would always lead it to be this way, it's in the past now, so you can say to yourself, this is fate, so be it. So do notice that Stoicism is complicated and meant to be a lifelong endeavor. Details matter with this stuff. You have to get to a point where simple sayings don't really cut it anymore. That's when you're ready to start really making changes in your life. If I see something that says, be strong, well, that's great, but the how and why of it matters a lot. If I tell someone at work to use a tool they've never used before, especially dangerous ones, and I just say go for it, I'm not setting them up for success because I'm not telling them any of the details of how to do it. So as you get more into self-development, details start to matter a lot more, but you also want to simplify things for yourself by combining things when you can. So with Stoicism being complicated, notice that they focus on the present but also seem to think about things. They're combining the two, they're trying to be as present as possible when needed, while also trying to think of ways to better triumph in life. So this is a subtle detail and certainly more advanced Stoicism, so I'll just read a quote to you and leave you to understand it. Since such an external event does not depend on me, it itself is indifferent, and we might therefore expect the Stoic to greet it with indifference. Indifference, however, does not mean coldness. Then a little bit later he says, to be indifferent to indifferent things, that is, to things which don't depend on me, in fact means to make no difference between them. It means to love them equally, just as nature produces them with equal love. One big thing you'll notice is the Stoics have many powerful heroes to look up to, which is important in any society. If society doesn't readily give you heroes, you're going to need to find your own. And you know, it wouldn't hurt to try to be your own hero too. You are your own hero already, you're trying to improve yourself to be the best version of yourself. That's pretty heroic. Here's a speech that I found powerful. It's pretty long. So the difference between kids from the 90s and kids from later generations is that while they were playing Minecraft, we were experiencing stuff like this. I truly believe kids from the 90s have one of the best chances of changing humanity because we're what I'd call the caught-between generation. We know what the old, better world was like and experienced the changeover to the new world pretty young in our lives, but not so young that we thought it was normal.
Have you chosen the one to become your faith? Who will it be?
Might I ask something first? Will sin come back even should I use the final summoning to defeat it?
Sin is eternal. Every aeon that defeats it becomes sin in its place. And thus is sin reborn.
So that's why Jack became Sin.
Sin is an inevitable part of Spira's destiny. It is never-ending.
Never-ending? But if we atone for our crimes, sin will stop coming back, yeah? Someday it'll be gone, yeah?
Will humanity ever attain such purity?
This cannot be! The teachings state that we can exercise sin with complete atonement! It's been our only hope all these years!
Hope is comforting. It allows us to accept fate, however tragic it might be.
No!
Where is the sense in all this? Braska believed in Yevon's teachings and died for them. Jack believed in Braska and gave his life for him.
They chose to die because they had hope. Yevon's teachings and the final summoning give the people of Spira hope. Without hope, they would drown in their sorrow. Now choose. Who will be your faith? Who will be the one to renew Spira's hope?
No one. I would have gladly died. I live for the people of Spira, and would have gladly died for them, but no more. The final summoning is a false tradition that should be thrown away.
No, it is our only hope. Your father sacrificed himself to give that hope to the people, so they would forget sorrow.
Wrong. My father... My father wanted to make Spiro's sorrow go away, not just cover it up with lies.
Sorrow cannot be abolished. It is meaningless to try.
My father, I loved him. So I will live with my sorrow. I will live my own life. I will defeat sorrow in his place. I will stand my ground and be strong. I don't know when it will be, but someday I will conquer it. And I will do it without false hope.
Poor creature. You would throw away hope. Well, I will free you before you can drown in your sorrow. It is better for you to die in hope than to live in despair. Let me be your liberator.
Now! This is it! Now is the time to choose. Die and be free of pain, or live and fight your sorrow. Now is the time to shape your stories. Your fate is in your hands.
Yuna needs Kimari. Kimari protect Yuna.
Well, I'm fighting.
I can't believe we're gonna fight Lady Yunalesca. Give me a break.
You can always run.
Ah! I'd never forgive myself. No way. Not if I ran away now. Even in death, yeah?
My thoughts exactly.
Yuna! This is our story. Now let's see this thing through together.
So this speech actually goes well with Stoicism, because Stoicism certainly doesn't want you clinging to false hope. Stoicism wants you to face your problems head on and fight your despair when it comes. Even if it has a hope for humanity to flourish, the Stoic understands that this may not come to pass and is still resolved regardless. Big political changes that result in mass death almost always promise some sort of false hope, like giving free things to everyone. Zeno said that without wisdom, we are destined to be enemies to each other, including parents being hostile to their children, the rich being hostile to the poor, different races being hostile to each other because of lack of good sense, and different genders being hostile to each other because of lack of wisdom. Literally every possible divide that the elite push on us can be used against us. You have to traverse the dangers of all the tricks that are played on you by the rich who never like to be named. Remember, if you're allowed to criticize them all the time, they're most likely not ruling you. If you're never allowed to mention them or criticize them, they're your actual rulers. But also recognize if they're doing everything they can to weaken one specific type of people, they see that group of people as a huge threat. Always remember that. Their propaganda wouldn't be necessary if they had already won. So the trick Stoics use to love other humans, even though a lot of them are bad and irrational, is to love them because they have the potential to be wise and virtuous. Cicero says when we see virtue in other people, our natural affection for them is brought out and we admire the shining light of goodness and excellence in their character. So there are some people I encounter who are severely messed up and mistreat others all the time, including me, but I'm more fair than necessary to them because I want to see the potential of their virtue come out. And if I mistreat them back, I'm making it more likely that they'll continue to be a bad person. Bad people can be converted to good people, it just takes a lot of patience and effort. And you know, isn't always a guarantee, but it's worth a shot. As the Stoics put it, regular people offer glimpses of virtue, but people that either consciously or unconsciously train in the way of virtue can get to the point that they fully embody virtue. This gets into Zeus and the ideal sage a bit more. Zeus was who they considered the perfectly virtuous being. A little below that is the perfect sage as far as humans go. Then somewhere below that are people actively trying to be virtuous in a wide range depending on how well they do. So it turns out, people really do better when they have some sort of heroic figure to aspire to be, and nothing's higher than a god. So even if a god doesn't actually exist, a virtuous godlike figure is still very beneficial for a society to aspire to. Society becomes aimless and only focused on degeneracy without a god to look up to. The people who remove God from societies know this, so they actively try their hardest to push the population to be atheist in populations they want to destroy. I used to be agnostic, I watched all the popular media that made me agnostic, and I thought I was being a rebel by doing so, but I was actually only doing exactly what they wanted me to do. I know all the thoughts of an agnostic in and out because I used to be one for a very long time. It's more accurate to say I was agnostic than atheist because atheists try to factually assert that there is no God, and I was like, I'm just a human, dude. I have no idea if there 100% sure isn't a God. It's probably above my understanding. So I was at least agnostic, and could still continue to be so, but I became Christian because I realized the rulers of the world are very evil and seem to dislike Christians a lot, so the ultimate act of defiance towards them is to be a Christian. But I feel it's important to mention I'm what you'd call a picky Christian. I think you have to be these days. If you literally interpreted the Bible, you'd have to do some pretty messed up things. So just like the hardcore Christians I hung out with at one point, even they realized a lot of the Bible was man-made. You do have to be selective. And also, the Bible doesn't have to be a literal telling of events. Jesus did speak in parables after all, meaning lessons. Maybe the entire Bible is just one huge book of lessons. If that turns out to be true, I wouldn't be mad. My faith doesn't rely on the entire Bible being a factual telling of events or God even existing. If those pillars are removed, my Christianity would still hold strong. I think this is a wise form of Christianity to have because it makes your faith basically unstoppable. I'm interested in all that I can learn from all types of spirituality, regardless of if the gods they worship are real or not. I like to incorporate my faith with real science as much as possible, real science meaning science that you're allowed to question. However, I'll get much more into why I'm a picky Christian in later videos. For the people who think we're in a simulation, I'll ask you a question. Do simulations create themselves? Does a video game create itself? No, there's always a creator. So if you believe in simulation theory, someone created it, and that someone would be our God. So the Stoics want you to love your enemies because they offer glimpses of virtue. I can do that if the enemy fights up front. My personal limit is I can't love enemies who fight in sneaky ways that try to destroy my society without even waging an actual war. That's very cowardly and I can't think of one positive thing to say about it. If you win that way, in my opinion, you lost because you had to win by cheating. It's like, yeah, you can technically win a game with cheat codes, but there's no satisfaction in doing so. If our secret rulers have to win by being nepotistic and sneaky and subversive, they didn't really win anything. Back to more positive things, the Stoics have the hope for mankind that all humans will become enlightened, flourish, and live in harmony with each other. If everyone was a Stoic, including our leaders, this could happen. But there's still a small possibility it can happen, even without the leaders believing so. I've been seeing a lot of pushback and resistance lately, and I've gotten back a little bit of my hope in humanity. The hope of humanity is in the will to fight back, and the will to survive, and the will to create a better tomorrow. Stoics want to form a metaphorical cosmic city, meaning we're all citizens of the cosmos or universe who virtuously help each other thrive towards a utopia. It even sounds like Cosmopolitanism, which is the belief that all citizens are entitled to equal respect. A nuance here is to keep in mind that whether another person acts virtuously or not towards this cosmic city is ultimately indifferent to you, because you can only control it so much. It still should not affect your progress towards eudaimonia. If they become virtuous or not, great. If not, oh well, people are very flawed. I consider a friend anyone I've shared continuous struggle with that we came out the other side of, or someone that I've continuously kept in contact with for years because it's mutually beneficial. The Stoics believe that it's ideal to have a small circle of good friends, or even just one good friend, but that you should ultimately be happy without them should that come to pass. I personally choose to keep the friends I can, but should something unfortunate happen, you must still continue. They would have wanted you to live with strength and joy and be self-sufficient in their stead. People come and go. You have to be able to continue onward regardless. The Stoics considered wisdom to have an infinite wellspring. If you share wisdom with others, they didn't consider it to be depleted, but rather enhanced. By sharing wisdom with others, you're increasing the overall wisdom in the world. You may not think they do, but the little things you do really do matter. One effect you have on one person can affect the people they affect, and the people they affect, and the people they affect, and on and on and on. The part I'm definitely still working on is Stoics want you to love humanity from the bottom of your heart, and I'm definitely not to that point. Maybe I can get to that point, but if I don't, I think the Stoics would be okay with that being indifferent to my overall happiness. And even if they weren't, I don't need the Stoics' permission to be happy, only mine, as much as I revere and value their teachings. You'll always have your own personal philosophy whether you think about it or not. Other philosophies are only meant to help you fully form your own, though I choose to follow Stoicism closely because I rarely ever disagree with them. A quote they have that I'm going to paraphrase is, "It's a man's privilege to love even those who stumble, and this love follows as soon as you reflect that they are akin to you and that they do wrong involuntarily and through ignorance, and above all, that the person has done you no harm, for they have not made your ruling faculty of wisdom worse than it was before." Stoics view foolish and evil and vicious people as small children throwing a tantrum, and basically that's what they are, because think of a 3-year-old going mine, mine, mine. That's where a lot of the problems in the world come from, especially higher up. And so, Stoics have this sort of paternal concern for humanity while trying to watch over it. Socrates is considered the most sage-like philosopher in existence to the Stoics. Xenophon, who inspired Zeno, and remember Zeno was one of the founders of Stoicism, called Socrates the perfect example of goodness and happiness. Socrates was put on trial for execution because he asked too many questions. The people in high-up positions don't like thinkers, that's why they actively try to dumb down societies. They certainly don't want a society of philosophers, that would be really dangerous to them. Some things never change. Anyway, they put Socrates up for execution by making him drink poison. The Stoics were impressed because of how Socrates met his fate with serenity and unshakable devotion to his philosophical principles. Socrates didn't beg as he died, he was completely unaffected, and that lack of reaction really angered the rich trying to kill him. Always remember, when people are doing something bad to you, they often want a reaction. If you don't give them that, you're often denying them the actual thing they're seeking. Socrates used even his dying moments to be completely committed as a teacher, and used it as an opportunity to teach the room about wisdom and virtue, even the corrupt elites. Socrates drank the poison and immediately became a hero, a godlike human if you will. Socrates uses one life to benefit all of humanity for thousands of years to come. Stoics say you should act as if all of humanity is part of the same body, each forming a cell of the same organism. This is how you can attain Philadelphia, which means brotherly love in Greek, which is where the name of the city comes from. Love of mankind is philanthropia, which is where the word philanthropy comes from. So here's a very important nuance that will help you achieve true Stoicism. Stoics believe you should sometimes behave as if you agree with the conventional values around other people. When someone's tearing up about their friend dying, they want sympathy, not the facts, and so you should be a good shoulder to lean on. However, inwardly, you should shield yourself against the emotions they're feeling because you know that death is just a fact of life and that it's ultimately indifferent to your happiness. Remember though, if someone leaves something behind, maybe they're really not all that dead. Something of them is living on. The series One Piece teaches all about passing on your will so that even if you die, your will lives on. This is actually completely embodied by the way Socrates died and left his will on with philosophy. So let's get back to something that's like spheres of influence, but not quite the same. Heracles, a peer to Marcus Aurelius, said our relationships can be considered like circles that radiate outwards from ourselves. So for example, self is in the center, family one circle out from that, friends another circle out from that, fellow people of your city or town one more circle out from that, people of your nation next, and then mankind as a whole after that. He said we want to close the distance on those circles, pulling them as close to the center as possible, meaning it doesn't take some massive distance or stretch for you to love mankind as a whole, but rather a small stretch. Your love isn't conditional. He said one way you can do this is to call acquaintances friends and friends a brother or sister. One of his exercises was to close your eyes, then imagine an aura of light surrounding your body, then imagine that light is representing your wisdom and potential for virtue and your possible love for others. Now imagine that light expanding outwards and enveloping your family. Now expand it outwards to your friends. Now expand it outwards to your fellow citizens of the imperfect cosmos, your nation. Now expand it to the entire world, then the entire universe. It's all in your imagination, so you're capable of doing it. This is how you love with justice, because your love is fair and includes all beings. To love wisely, you have to accept that things within the universe are impermanent, so that you don't become overly attached and don't become bitter and incapable of loving after a love ends. Most people are irrational, so lots of things in the world end over completely trivial and silly reasons. Some things last for a long time, some don't. You must press onwards regardless, because that is your fate as a human being striving to live a good life. Epictetus says that if we're a slave to passion, even love, then it's a sign that something is going wrong. How the sage would act instead is to have a very firm grip on the true nature of the good, not be overly attached to someone to the point of it being unhealthy, straightforward in his dealings, and patient with the behavior of the unwise. Love hard, just make sure you're not destroyed if things go wrong, and try your best to preserve a loving relationship. They're not easy to come by. Here's a quote by Seneca. If you come across a person who is never alarmed by dangers, never affected by cravings, happy in adversity, calm in the midst of storms, and viewing mankind from a higher level, is it not likely that a feeling will find its way into you of veneration of it?